Is that a wild Ludi face back on camera? Yes it is, boys. I am in fact in Romania for the time being, and I'm using a very old camera, but hey, it's better than no camera, right? Today, boys, we have a very special video because I am collaborating with Paradox, and I'm gonna be presenting to you the new DLC that just got released, namely the Japan history lessons. This came out with 1.35.4, and I have to say that this DLC being released paves the way towards a lot of other smaller DLCs to come, as well as it leads me personally to believe that there are some things that will be changing with EU4 that I feel like we really need to discuss. Before anything else, you can grab this DLC for yourself, or you can grab the history lesson bundle using my link in the description. It is €5 for the Japan history lessons, or 9 if you buy both the Japan and the China history lessons. And honestly, I have to say that if you enjoy history, you are absolutely gonna love this DLC, because it does essentially do just that. It presents a lot of historical facts about Japan. Now, you probably noticed after you load up your game that you have an extra tab here, the lesson start tab. You click on that, you click on Japan lectures, and then you have a variety of different lectures. There's 35 of them as of now, starting with the Sengoku Jidai, which explains essentially how the Japanese warring period started and what it led down to, the period of Oda Nobunaga, Hideyoshi Toyotomi, as well as Tokugawa afterwards. Essentially, this whole period here between 1573 and 1603 is one of the most influential parts in Japanese history, and I've already listened to the podcast. I have to say that they do an amazing job explaining in easy to comprehend words the history of this particular time period. And I really think that as a casual player, when you're playing as, say, Tokugawa, or you're playing as Oda, or you're playing as Uesugi, or anybody of the sorts, it's actually really nice hearing about the background of that particular nation. Speaking of, there's dedicated podcasts on the shogunate, what the daimyos represented, the Ashikaga clan, as well as most of the clans, and the start date, and even some of the clans that appear later down the line, like the Mare clan over here that played an important part in Japanese history but is not available in 1444. I think if we click over to 1573, then yes, we do see the map change over to the 1573 map, and we also see the Mori clan, which, as I said, was a very important daimyo during this particular period. It's also a really interesting thing how, you know, you can see the actual extent and the borders of the particular daimyos in Japan during this period when you click on the lessons, so it's easier to follow along with the podcast when you see exactly what happened in Japan. You see it illustrated on the map with the accurate depictions of the particular daimyos. We also have a podcast on the Japanese Ryukyu relations, because the Ryukyu Islands, which is modern Okinawa Islands and so on, and the Ryukyu people by extension have had a little bit of a different path in history compared to the mainland Japanese ones. So seeing those relations between mainland Japan and Ryukyu is interesting, as are the Japanese Korean and Japanese Ming relations for that matter. And these three podcasts, in my opinion, are some of the best out of this 35 series. Strongly recommend you guys check these out. There's also some interesting ones on Mount Fuji, the Sankinkontai palaces, basically the monuments within the Japanese islands. Himeji Castle also being one of the monuments. The Swordhan, Kirishitan Daimyo, Chrysanthemum Throne, and the Bushido Code also are fairly good. There's one podcast on the Ainu people, which technically are not Japanese people, but eventually, well, modern Ainu people are pretty much very well integrated within Japan. But historically, they were separate indigenous people in the Japanese islands that have existed here from way before the Japanese actually migrated to these parts. There were some parts of the podcast that I actually didn't know about, so I was really happy to learn new things about the Japanese islands and about Japan's beautiful history. And as you probably know, guys, I also have a bachelor's in history, and I absolutely love history in general. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, and I'm playing historical games. And I really feel that you guys will enjoy this DLC too, because, you know, you're going to be playing the game and whilst you're playing it, you have something in the background that most people usually have, like a YouTube or something of the source that they're listening to. This actually pertains to the actual game that you're playing, so it's really a different experience. I'm going to show you afterwards, because we will be playing a Japan game right afterwards, but first I want to discuss a few more things. Like I said before, there are certain things that this DLC allude to, and the release of these two DLCs right now make me a little bit intrigued, let's say, because I'm realizing there's a new path that Paradox is taking with this particular game. We all know that they mentioned there's going to be 2 more DLCs right before EU5 comes out, or obviously they didn't say before EU5 comes out, but they did say there's going to be 2 more DLCs. This type of DLC that they release now, the Japanese podcast and the Chinese podcast, is an easy way for them to keep EU4 interesting, keep people interested in the brand. And that's actually a good thing, because let's face it, if you don't give something every once in a while for this game, which is a very old game, people do lose interest, since there's a lot of other Paradox games that people play at the same time that are getting a lot more attention, such as Hoi 4, CK3, and so on. Now, if we take a look at EU4 historically speaking, from 2014 and up till 2023, it's had a little bit of an ascend. You can see an average of 8,000 to 9,000 players, and then slowly this started increasing the more DLCs came out, with I believe the Emperor DLC having the biggest influence on the game, with the highest amount of consecutive players at 47,000 players, and then again a big jump with the afterwards DLCs of Lions of the North, 33,000, and Domination, 34,000. That's also because this is a very niche game. Not everybody plays this type of historically inclined map game, right? By contrast, though, if you look at Hoi 4, which started with 9,000 to 10,000, just like EU4, it is up to 50,000 consecutive without any DLCs being released. And when it does have a DLC, it's up to 70,000, 68,000. So Hoi 4 really has taken over as the flagship of Paradox when it comes to grand strategy games, which was really not the case just a few years ago. Now, backtracking a little bit to the history podcast here for Japan, I've done a little bit of digging also, and the creator of the history podcast, Mr. Isaac Meyer, who is a PhD student at the University of Washington, specializing in modern Japan and a few other things, does have a bonus episode on Paradox Interactive interview, which is not related to the DLC, but there are some interesting things that he talks about in this particular interview that I managed to pick up on that I think you guys will find interesting as well. For once, they've been working on this particular DLC for a year, so that means last year is when they started discussing or started doing this particular DLC and setting up these particular lessons for the game. Now, what this means is that most likely we're going to see more podcasts or more history lessons added to the game for other parts of the world, not just Japan and China. I'm really assuming that Germany's going to be involved, or a lot of European, African, maybe even New World nations will be the focus of more small history lesson DLCs, I guess we could call them at this point. I don't know what to call them particularly, but I guess history lesson DLC would be a good word. It's also kind of weird how Japan and China is the first two to be launched, considering that most players play mostly in Europe, and I've seen a few people also mention that about the DLCs. But I think the reason for that is because this is history that not many people are aware of, and at the same time it is history that is extremely interesting, and it might bring some appeal for players to play in these areas, which is something they normally would not do, as sadly a lot of players, especially the newer players CE4, mostly play in Europe. It takes a while for people to get comfortable to play outside of the European continent and just see how amazing the rest of the game is. Let's face it, most of the cool nations in EU4 are actually in Asia. Another thing that we really need to keep into account is the fact that you don't actually make a whole new tab here for lessons started, which is, you know, it indicates that they definitely want to add a lot more lectures aside from the Japanese and the Chinese one. I'm guessing that this is actually going to be completely filled by the time that EU5 comes out. But now let's actually test this out, see how it fares when we play the game and we have the lectures in the background for us. I'm going to continue my Japan campaign here. We've already established ourselves as the ultimate Japanese Schnapple dupe. We are a little bit behind with our admin tech because we did kind of core stuff a little bit too much, and we were a little bit expensive, weren't we? But we'll catch up with it. To make a little bit of a summing up, economically speaking, we're A-okay right now. We're in the process of building up all the stuff we need to build around the Japanese islands. We have the gold mines as well, which are at 10 base production, so we're getting the optimal amount of gold from these with the least chance of depleting these gold mines. We're not playing too aggressively also. We might take the rest of Manchuria and these parts in the north, but that's not a priority. I've also expanded a little bit in the south, so I'm going to prevent the other nations from snaking into Ming by taking the borders of Ming myself. Actually waiting for the truce to expire until I attack them again in a few years, so there's that. And of course, we are going to be going into the New World. We got our colonists ready. I am prioritizing a little bit colonizing the Asian bits before that, so I can actually get the spices in Asia and prevent the Europeans from getting a foothold here if I can. I'm also trying to get Micronesia for the 5% settler chance and essentially the monument we have in Micronesia. Looks like we also need to lower our autonomy a little bit in the provinces I guess we just conquered, and I don't mind converting these people to my particular culture simply because Ainu is a very small group and I don't want to waste an entire culture slot for just 5 provinces over here. Oh, this is the horrible earthquake of 1503. Now with the 1.35 DLC and update, Ming gets a lot of these horrible events that destroy its mandate and just absolutely devastate its country. Of course, they already have 0 mandate, so it's fairly easy for me to attack them. But with these events as well, it's just insanely easy for me to attack them. Now, whilst we're waiting for our country to recover economically and whilst we're doing all of the schnaps that we're doing, let's listen a little bit to some of these podcasts here. I want to show you guys the Japanese-Ming relations one, and I also want to show you the Toyotomi Hideyoshi one, because some of you might know Toyotomi Hideyoshi was actually a regular peasant. He was a conscript in the Japanese armies of Oda Nobunaga, and he managed to work his way from a regular conscript all the way towards becoming a member of the aristocracy, as we would call it in Europe, and eventually becoming the leader of Oda Nobunaga's nation, or I guess shogunate, really. This man here is the embodiment of somebody who managed to work his way through sheer skill, because he was a really skilled warrior and tactician, to pretty much the top of his particular society.
For much of Japan's pre-modern history, China was naturally a major influence. The oldest written records of Japanese history are from China, and much of Japan's elite culture is derived from Chinese sources. Buddhism as a religion came to Japan through China via Korea, and the classical government of Japan's emperors was patterned on the system used by the emperors of China's Tang dynasty. During the rule of China's Ming dynasty, which lasted from 1368 until the mid-1600s, the Japan-China relationship would in many ways grow closer, though in others the two countries would diverge. Politically, the emperors of the Ming kept Japan at arm's length.
Gonna make a little bit of a side note here. The early Bushido Code is by far one of the strongest tier 5 reforms you can get here. You can also get the Ashigaru regiment that lowers the infantry costs and offers more tradition from battles, but the yearly tradition decay minus 1% is insane. And yes, we are low on army tradition because we haven't had that many wars. We've mostly been working on fixing our economic output over here. I've also decided to convert all of the Ainu to my primary culture, because there's no point in me actually wasting one entire promoted culture slots for just 5 small low-dev provinces.
The first Ming emperor, the Hongwu emperor, was very invested in a vision of social and political harmony in his lands, which would be governed by a strict hierarchy with the emperor of China at the top. This hierarchy, in turn, would not just cover the lands of the dynasty, but the entire world. Foreign rulers would be encouraged to subordinate themselves to the Ming emperor in exchange for recognition, protection, and the right to trade in China's massive and wealthy port cities. To that end, Hongwu dispatched envoys to Japan encouraging its rulers to accept this system, which we call the tributary system, and asking that the Japanese work to suppress the rampant piracy based in their islands. The ruling shogun, Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, was willing to accept these demands, though he wasted very little time fighting pirates and preferred to simply bribe them to behave, and he accepted tributary status, a fact that has enraged Japanese nationalists ever since, but which did allow Japanese merchants access to Chinese ports. For over 100 years, Japan acted as a tributary of China following the rules of what was called the tally trade. Tributaries were allowed to send trade missions in fixed cycles every few years, and were issued passes matching the year their mission had been assigned to. These passes could be matched to ones kept in China by Chinese officials to ensure the trade mission was legitimate, with new passes being issued upon the ascension of a new Chinese emperor. An official tally mission would come to China at the appropriate time, and bearing gifts marking their ruler's submission to China's emperor. In return, they would receive gifts of higher value, showing the emperor's generosity and wealth. They would also, as a part of this ceremony of homage, be allowed to trade. The tally trade functioned well enough for a time, but demand for Chinese goods in Japan was so great that illegal trade missions outside of the specified times became rather frequent, raising the ire of Confucian bureaucrats who ran China's government and whose intellectual training led them to view any attempt at profit-seeking as fundamentally parasitic and based in greed. The official tally trade also began to break down. Once the Ashikaga shoguns began to lose control of Japan, their ostensible vassals began to fight over control of the tallies which the shogun possessed. Those tallies, after all, were the key to trade with China and the enormous wealth it represented. That trend culminated in 1523, when competing trade missions from the Ouchi and Hosokawa clans, each bearing what they claimed to be legitimate tallies, came to blows in China's port city of Ningbo. In the aftermath, the Ming emperors stopped issuing new tallies to Japan, effectively severing official relations and banning trade, though illicit trade between the two continued. The relationship would never be officially resumed, and in the 1590s, Japan and the Ming would end up at war. The warlord who reunified Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, decided to invade Korea as a first step to a grandiose vision of conquering the entire Asian mainland and placing himself upon China's imperial throne. The Koreans, unlike the Japanese, followed the tributary system and were entitled to the Emperor of China's protection, and so Ming armies were dispatched to Korea to help the Koreans fight off Japan. Even after the ceasefire, official trade and diplomacy never resumed, but illegal trade, labeled by Chinese officials as piracy, continued apace. It's natural enough that the trade would continue without official sanction because it was massively valuable. Chinese goods, which were among the finest in the world, had a massive market in Japan, and anyone who could bring them in, from pirates to Portuguese merchants acting as middlemen, was guaranteed to make a killing. Indeed, more so than European goods, what made Portuguese merchants in Japan rich was their ability to act as middlemen for Chinese goods coming from their base at Macau, since Portuguese ships did have permission from China's emperor to trade. Everything from Chinese textiles to textbooks had a buyer in Japan, and usually at outrageous markups.
Hey, boys, look at that. We got the Nanma Dole, the greatest dole in the Nan, obviously. And that means eventually we're gonna get 5% selector chance once we fully upgrade this bad boy here. Also, have to say, massively impressed with Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The man is a true living Chad Lord, as they would say in medieval Japan.
Indeed, modern historical investigations have made clear that whatever their public stance, some of the chief Chinese backers of illegal trade missions sent to Japan, of which there were always a few whatever the official rules of the emperor were about trade, were the same bureaucratic elites who had created the trade ban in the first place. After all, bans create black markets, and black markets hugely inflate value, making an investment in illegal trade missions a massive cash cow. Probably the single most important import was actually currency. During the medieval era, the standard unit of exchange in Japan was Chinese coins, minted either during the Song or Ming dynasties, and shipped to Japan by the literal boatload. Bronze coins minted during the early Ming were especially valuable, and remained in circulation until they were replaced with domestically manufactured currency in the early 1600s. This illegal trade would continue through the end of the Ming dynasty and into the subsequent Qing dynasty. There's probably no better illustration of those enduring trade ties in the face of official bans then the fact that the leader of the last Ming Dynasty holdouts on Taiwan against the new Qing Dynasty was the pirate Prince Koxinga, who was of mixed Japanese and Chinese ancestry himself. In the social sphere too, Chinese influence over Japan was massive. Chinese art was extremely popular among the elite set in Japan, particularly the ink drawings known in Japanese as suiboka. Chinese ceramics were thought to be the gold standard. Indeed, the Japanese art of ikebana, or flower arranging, was originally born out of a need to find some sort of excuse for displaying fancy Chinese ceramics. Religiously, Buddhism was the dominant faith in much of Japan, with the traditional shamanistic beliefs known as Shinto remaining in a largely subordinate position, particularly among the elite, until the 1800s. Since Japanese Buddhism was heavily influenced by China, religious exchange between the two countries was frequent, and Japanese monks would travel to the continent regularly to study in Chinese monasteries. They would also often accompany trade missions both to give them legitimacy and because the monks all knew Chinese in order to read the sutras. Even early print culture was able to bridge the divide. The epic Chinese novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms was written in the early Ming era, and it developed quite a following in Japan as well. Indeed, that following continues today. The Three Kingdoms story is used in modern video games, manga, TV shows, and the like. Many of the great clan histories of the warring families of the Sengoku subtly or not so subtly stole scenes and plots from the novel to burnish their own family's prestige. In a certain sense, all of this history, from the cultural exchange to Hideyoshi's vision of making himself the ruler of China, is illustrative of a wider theme of China-Japan relations. By virtue of its sheer size, China has always, and likely will always, be a major cultural, economic, and political power in Asia, and as such will always be an influence on Japan. A big part of the story of Japanese history is a combination of attraction to that power and influence, and a fear that Chinese influence would subsume Japan itself, reducing the country to a mere appendage of China. Thus, the history of Japan's relations with China during the age of the Ming Dynasty is just one chapter in a much larger story.
Honestly, I just completely forgot Ryukyu even exists. I think I forgot to attack him last session, so there's that. Also, speaking of last session, guys, you can check out the previous parts of this campaign you'll have the link to that in the description below. And also, if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing. It would really help me out so much. And leave a like. If we get 5,000 likes in the first few days after this is out, I'm going to continue this campaign and we're going to take this over into Europe and make those schmelly Europeans regret ever meeting us. You know what I'm saying here? Now that we listened to Toyotomi Hideyoshi, let's also check out the Japanese Ming relations, and we're doing that whilst we're actually destroying Ming. Just for extra dramatic effect over here, we're going to be schnapple-duping the schnapps out of them.
By 1582, it was clear that Japan's reunification was on the horizon. The warlord Oda Nobunaga had, in the span of 30 years, gone from a minor ruler in Owari province to the master of the most important third of the country. He'd also defeated many of his most powerful rivals, including the warlords Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. It seemed clear that opposition to his rule was a doomed cause. But then disaster struck. Akechi Mitsuhide, one of Nobunaga's generals, betrayed his master. His motivations are unclear, and it may have been as much personal as it was political. For example, Mitsuhide was considered a fairly accomplished poet, a skill that traditionally marked someone as worthy of respect, and yet Nobunaga mocked and derided his work. To be fair, Nobunaga was a famously abrasive man to all of his followers, so Mitsuhide was not alone. However, Mitsuhide was a proud man, and was not particularly keen to take crap from a leader who should, to his mind, be rewarding him for faithful and honorable service. Mitsuhide may have also been offended by an incident in 1577 in which he'd personally led Oda forces against the Hatno clan of Tanba province along the Japan Sea coast. Mitsuhide had negotiated a settlement with the Hatno by which they agreed to surrender in exchange for his guarantee of the clan's safety. Nobunaga, for reasons unknown, overrode this guarantee and executed the clan leadership. The followers of the former Hatno, in turn, blamed Mitsuhide for lying to them as they understood it, and kidnapped and executed his mother. Mitsuhide likely, and not unjustifiably, blamed Nobunaga for her death. What we know is that on June 21st, 1582, Oda Nobunaga was in Kyoto, enjoying a brief respite while his armies were off on campaign. Akechi Mitsuhide seized the opportunity, ordering his personal forces to attack the city and kill Nobunaga, as well as Nobunaga's eldest son and heir, Oda Nobutada, who is inside of Nijo Castle on the other end of Kyoto. In the ensuing fighting, both were killed. It's often said that when he realized what was happening, Nobunaga set fire to the temple where he was staying, Honnoji, to ensure his body could not be desecrated by his enemies. Though in reality it is not quite clear who set the temple alight. Oda Nobutada, meanwhile, was killed fighting off Mitsuhide's forces as they attacked Nijo Palace. Famously, he'd been entertaining the two sons of the reigning emperor Ogimachi at the time of the attack, and both were forced to flee the palace on foot to escape the fighting. They were rescued only when a passing aristocrat also fleeing the fighting recognized the two boys and shepherded them away. With Nobunaga's death, the position of the Oda became tenuous. It was not immediately clear what Mitsuhide was going to do next. Would he declare his independence? Maybe make a play for control of the Oda clan itself? And how would the Oda clan's generals respond? The man of the hour ultimately proved to be one of Nobunaga's generals by the name of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was on campaign in western Japan when he heard the news of what had happened. He hastily hammered out a ceasefire with the local clans and then rushed back to Kyoto, crushing Mitsuhide on July 2nd at the Battle of Yamazaki. After fleeing the battle, Mitsuhide was killed by local bandits who turned the corpse over to Hideyoshi, who displayed his enemy's head in Kyoto as proof that Nobunaga had been avenged. Hideyoshi's status as Nobunaga's avenger allowed him to solidify a following among Nobunaga's former generals. This might seem odd because Nobunaga did have surviving male heirs, two more sons, Nobukatsu and Nobutaka, as well as a grandson, Hidenobu. However, this was an age where loyalty was not necessarily institutional or inherited. Oda generals were not loyal to the clan per se, but to Oda Nobunaga specifically, whom they knew and respected. Those generals did not know the young Oda heirs. The eldest of them was only 24 at this point. They did know Hideyoshi, who was both charismatic and a proven battlefield general. Very little is known about Hideyoshi's life before 1570, except that he came from a low-status background, but took advantage of the social mobility provided by the Civil War to start a military career. There's a famous story that he began his career in the Oda clan as Nobunaga's sandal-bearer, though it is unclear how true that is. We do know that by 1558 he was fighting for the Oda clan, and within a few years rose to be one of the clan's most prominent generals. He was, by all accounts, brilliant, ruthless, and extremely ambitious, a perfect combination for the moment now before him. Hideyoshi masked his ambition by claiming to champion the cause of Nobunaga's grandson Hidenobu, the eldest son of Nobunaga's eldest son. He also rapidly dispatched challenges to his authority by Oda Nobukatsu and Oda Nobutaka, Nobunaga's two remaining sons. In the former case, Hideyoshi relied on the carrot, convincing Nobukatsu to make peace after a brief war between them. In the latter, Hideyoshi relied on the stick, crushing Nobutaka and his primary military backer Shibata Katsuie, and then forcing Nobutaka to commit suicide. As a result, by 1584, Hideyoshi was the clear master of the Oda clan. 4 years later, he would dispense with the pretense of maintaining Oda rule, claiming for himself a series of grandiose titles, though not the title of shogun, because he lacked the elite social pedigree required to hold it. And 2 years after that, in 1590, Hideyoshi would finally complete the reunification of Japan by crushing the final holdouts against his rule. The rapidity with which Hideyoshi was able to do this might seem surprising. After all, while his position was strong to start, it was certainly not invincible. However, while the warlords opposing him were still substantial in number, they were divided amongst themselves and ultimately unable to unify. Indeed, in many cases, Hideyoshi was invited by smaller lords to intervene in local conflicts, in exchange for which they pledged him fealty. This strategy of divide and conquer, and the realization among many warlords that it was often a better bet to accept guaranteed safety and subordination to Hideyoshi rather than gamble on independence, enabled him to conquer Japan with enormous rapidity. This was an age of enormous change in Japan. For the first time in over a century, the country had been reunified under the rule of a single government. Peace had brought prosperity and booming economic growth. Yet on the other side of things, Hideyoshi's rule was not built on entirely stable foundations. He'd relied heavily on bribing his followers with land and wealth from defeated foes to keep them loyal. But now there were no more foes to defeat. His ties to his followers were, like those of Nobunaga before him, primarily based on his own personal charisma and reputation. but it was unclear what would happen when he was gone. And that was a serious and pressing question, because by this point Hideyoshi was in his 60s, and he did not have a son and heir to take the reins after him. 1582 and the rise of Hideyoshi thus represent an important turning point in the history of Japan's reunification. Hideyoshi's brilliance enabled him to take command of the Oda lands and swiftly reunify the country, and then to turn his ambitions overseas. At the same time, it was very unclear how stable or enduring this new arrangement would be, and whether the new order Hideyoshi had built would really be able to stand the test of time once he was gone. Were the civil wars really over, or was this merely an interlude before the fighting resumed?
Now I know what some of you thinking, oh Ludi, why you go for this poo-poo peace deal? Well, first off, I don't have the admin points to core all of this, right? And I hate being overextended too much. And most importantly, I've got some rebel problems in the north I also need to deal with. The money's gonna come in handy though, since I'm gonna use that to build up a lot of barracks around my country. Oh boy, Oirats seem to have grabbed a massive chunk out of Ming, so it's a little bit scary, not gonna lie, Oirats being a pretty powerful horde and everything, but hey, we'll deal with them as we go along. Now, when it comes to Ternat and Tidor, you could fully annex them for the spice that they offer, or you could make them vassals, and by making them vassals, you can use their mission tree to colonize the rest of the spice islands here. So we're gonna do exactly just that right now with Ternat. Let's go ahead and attack Tidor also. Tidor, we're gonna be fully annexing, however, not like Ternat. There you go. Now, we can go over to Ternat's mission, and we can do defeat our rival because we've made Tidor not exist anymore. That's going to get them the event The Spice Must Flow, and as you can see, they have a Siberian frontier type colony in this province, which hopefully is going to become a spice province. Let's see. Afterwards, once they finish that one, they're going to get another Spice Must Flow and another one and another one. I'm also going to be creating a trading post in this province here. I want to get as much trade in the Malacca node as possible. We got 10%. Once we send our ships, we're going to get significantly more. So hey, if you want to see the last part for this, you know what you need to do. And don't forget to get the DLC for yourself. You will not regret it. Use my link in the description to support the channel. And until the next time, check out this awesome Muscovy video.